Good afternoon, migrant leaders mentees. My name is Elham Fardod. I know many of you have met me previously in our conferences and presentations. I am the founder and CEO of the charity Migrant Leaders, and I'm really pleased that you have set aside an hour of your time today to meet our Anglo American colleagues, corporate partner, and also to hear about CV writing so that you can pick up some skills and ask any questions that you might have about this topic. A little bit about myself. I am in my late 40s. I am married with two wonderful children and have had a really rewarding career of 23 years as a finance director in large corporates, GE, News Corp, Ernst & Young, and 5 years ago, I launched the charity Migrant Leaders to help young first and second generation migrants succeed in the UK, primarily in the corporates. I'm going to give you two numbers for today. One number is 7%, and the other number is 50%. And I'll tell you what that means. The Institute for Fiscal Studies Dayton Review recently shared with us that in the UK, migrant children who are born in the UK to migrant parents actually have double the rate of university degrees compared to the white majority in the UK. So they have double the rate of university degrees. But that same group are 7%, around 7% behind in employment terms, and even further behind in attaining professional jobs and progression. So you wonder, why is that? They have degrees, they really succeed educationally. And the difference is actually connections. Connections, relationships, employability, know-how, knowing from the age of 16, 17, 18, how to write CVs, how to present themselves, how to introduce themselves, how to do their LinkedIn profiles, what kind of companies to go for, what decisions to make about their subjects to study at university, and what jobs and careers mean what to their future. So it's these topics that actually make all the difference. And for that, you need professionals around you, you need connections, and you need that employability and learning from a young age. And that's what Migrant Leaders tries to bring you. Anglo American is really special because Anglo American is actually our first corporate partner from 5 years ago. And we now have 12 corporate partners. We've got 1,200 migrant leaders mentors in a variety of fields from 95 big top companies. And we have 12 corporate partners, including an Anglo American. And I am really pleased to be doing this with them tonight, because this is part of a series of webinars to help you with employability topics, such as preparing your CV, career tips, interview tips, negotiation skills, how to look after your physical and mental health so that you can be happy, healthy, and successful. And I did promise you another number, didn't I? I gave you the 50% number. If you look in the UK, there was another statistic that came out about a year ago that said that in the UK, disadvantaged graduates earn half the graduate salary of privileged graduates. And that really seems counterintuitive, because they're both graduates. Why should, at the start of their career, disadvantaged students earn 50% of their salary of privileged graduates? And I'm afraid, or I'm happy to say at least, that the root causes of that challenge are the same as the other statistic I gave you. It's all around getting early insights, early advice, knowing what you're studying for, knowing what you're trying to achieve, and what your future career will look like. So we try and give you this and more at Migrant Leaders. Without taking up any more of your time, because tonight is about CV writing, I am delighted to introduce you to Salima Shariff, who is an absolutely phenomenal supporter of Migrant Leaders, and is a HR leader at Anglo American, who will be talking you through our CV writing webinar today. Salima, over to you.
Elam, thank you very much, everybody. And you will be hearing from one or two of my other colleagues also as I talk. So Scott, wave. You're the only other brave person who's got their camera on today. So you'll also hear from my wonderful colleague, Scott. So as Elam said, well, my name is Salima Shariff. I'm one of the HR leaders at Anglo American. I'm not going to give away my age, but I will tell you I'm 28. And some people think, but you don't look 28. There are days when I don't look 28 and there's days I don't feel 28, but today I feel 28, and 28 is the date because it was a wonderful time in my life and I've decided to freeze time and I'm going to be 28 forever, and until I decide to catch up with my actual age. So today we're going to give you a bit of a masterclass into how to write outstanding CVs, and I'll be upfront with you where I'm not going to tell you anything that you probably don't already know. So I'm hoping some of the reminders I'll be sharing with you will just be reminders. It'll just be little hints and tips that you can gather as you guys think about doing your CVs. One of the things I tell members of my team, and actually broader in our organization, when it comes to the end of the year, I actually do a couple of things. I actually update my LinkedIn profile and I actually update my CV. So even if it's one of the things that you're going to do in the end of year break that I hope all of you will be taking is to either write your CV, review your CV, update your CV. End of the year is a really good opportunity just to dust off the CV that you may have, or write one if you don't have, and just to make sure that you've captured everything that you want to. And I think this webinar will give you a flavor, bit of a reminders of all those important items. We will be leaving plenty of time for QA. And please, we want to hear your questions. It's a wonderful opportunity for you to ask us questions, so to speak. Thank you very much, Rami. I don't look 28. Well, fantastic. I do look 28, sorry. Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Compliments like that are really great for speakers. Pity I can't multitask, okay? But really do want your Q&As coming into play because it's the only way in which we can make sure we're asking those questions, answering those questions for you. And today you'll have myself and you'll have my wonderful colleague, Scott. And what you'll also find is we'll all have a slightly different opinion. And I think that's also the other piece about CVs. There is no one definitive way, this is a great CV. And one of the things I'll tell you is it is best to have a baseline CV that you can then change and adapt depending upon the role that you apply for. And I'll also throw at you a couple of other hints and tips that I've had, bearing in mind that I've spent many an hour, days, weeks, and some people might say years reviewing CVs, and so has my colleague Scott as well. So I wouldn't say we're experts. I would say we've certainly got a view of, when you've only got 15 seconds, 30 seconds sometimes to review of CV, how we scan through it, how we skim through it. And remember, sometimes a good CV can be a difference between being invited to the next stage or not being invited to the next stage. And a lot of that is about content, format, and preparation. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. All of these slides will be made available to you afterwards. So please, feel free to make lots of notes in yourselves, and then that will also, I think, help you. Okay. So very simple. We're going to talk to you about what is a CV, its purpose. And some of you might be thinking, well, I clearly know what a CV is, or its purpose, bit of a reminder. We're going to share with you what the components are, and in particular, what is critical about a compelling CV. A little bit about do's and don'ts. I'm not a real fan of do's and don'ts because if you have lots of different opinions, everybody else will have a different opinion on font size. Do you have a personal statement? Do you not have a personal statement? Do you include references? Do you include your hobbies, etc.? But we'll give you a flavor for what might be some of those do's and don'ts, as well as some of the tips that I would definitely suggest. I would also add, I've actually got a viewpoint that is not just from an employer, a HR leader perspective. I'm actually in the process of supporting my daughter, who's very, very similar in age to all of you. And I've also seen some of the really interesting feedback that she's getting from her teachers, her tutors, her lecturers, her careers advice people, her mentors about how to write a good CV. And sometimes I sit down going, oh my gosh, sometimes the advice is conflicting as well. So once again, lots of different opinions. We will just talk you through what we think will is helpful. I think one of the things that to also always remember is your CV or curriculum vitae is your personal marketing tool. It should be, and I use the word interesting, brief, and informative. It is always worth having a baseline CV. So, I mentioned up front, during Christmas, I will be updating my CV. I will be updating my baseline CV. And that baseline CV is my go-to CV I go to. And every single time I apply for another role, I look at the role profile or the job adverts that I'm applying for, and I will adapt my CV to that role profile. I'm not lying. I'm not making it up. I'm sometimes adapting it. So for example, if they're talking about transformation, leadership, influencing, persuading, there may be some targets in there. I will look through my CV to say which examples, experiences, and skills can I accentuate? So if somebody's reviewing my CV, it's very clear to them why Salima should be on the maybe pile and not on the no pile. I've mentioned earlier up about research has shown most recruiters spend less than 15 seconds. If you're lucky, it's 30 seconds. They'll look at your CV. And a lot of organizations now will use machine learning to actually review your CV as well. And machine learning, don't get me wrong, is getting very sophisticated. It will review and almost learn to read your CV. But hey, if the information is not on there or it's really, really buried down, you can't expect a human or even a machine to be able to pull up and put your CV higher up in the pile to potentially progress you to the next stage. And as I've said before, it can be the difference between landing your interview or being declined. And the final point, and I'm guilty of this, is your CV is not meant to be a biography of everything that you've ever done. It is not meant to be your LinkedIn page. It's not meant to be your Wikipedia page. It's not meant to be including everything that you've possibly done. It's to really highlight those important skills, knowledges, and experiences that you have that are pertinent to the role at hand. Anything else they can explore when they get to the next stage of the process, whether it's a video interview, whether it's a video on demand, or whether it's a face-to-face interview. So a little bit of an introduction around those items. But let's move on. And I really would love to actually see some numbers coming up in the chat here. And the first one is around, do you have an up-to-date CV? No, I don't. Put a 1. Yes, I do. It is up to date. And guess what? I'll give you a 5. And the 5 will be, I have one, but I haven't updated it. So do you have an up-to-date CV? 1, I don't. 5 is I do, but I haven't updated it. And 10, yes, and it's up to date. So if you can start putting that in the chat, that would be wonderful. And that will just help me get a sense of where are we? Are we looking at people who've got nothing? Have we got people who've got everything? And that we can sort of adapt a little bit in terms of what we are doing. And as I can't see the chat coming through, I might ask either Elam or Scott to maybe shout out some numbers that you might be seeing coming through.
Yeah, we've got a real combination here. So we've got a few 10s, and yeah, 2 or 3 10s I'm seeing, 3 or 4 5s, and then quite a number of 1s, maybe 10 or 12 1s is what we're seeing here.
Brilliant, thank you, Scott. So we've got a whole variety of people on the call, and those of you who are 10, fantastic. Maybe you can also take maybe 1 or 2 things from today's session and there's, oh, maybe I should tweak this, maybe I should tweak that. Hey, you may be one of those people when Scott and I ask them really, really tricky questions, you can help answer those questions as well. But I do think having a CV and evolving your CV is a bit like, a painting the 4th bridge. You have to start and you do it again, then you start and then you do it again. It's an ongoing piece. The second question I want to ask everybody is, do you have an up-to-date LinkedIn profile? 1, no, or what is LinkedIn? And I'm going to make it easy now. 10, yes, I do. Okay, so is it 1 or 10? Look, I'll make it even nice. I'll give you a 5. You may have 1, but you might have done it a couple of years ago. You haven't updated or a couple of months ago. So 1, 5, and 10. And the reason for mentioning this isn't a LinkedIn conversation or LinkedIn piece, but there is a correlation between As I said, when I'm doing my CV, I'll update my CV. I'll also use it as an opportunity to update my LinkedIn profile. It's not meant to be a replication of my CV, but the world we are in at the moment, quite a lot of employers and recruiters will use LinkedIn as a sourcing channel, as a way of finding suitable candidates for a role as well. So that's why LinkedIn has an important role to play in all of this. So maybe, Scott, you could start seeing if there's any other numbers that are coming in that are pertinent to LinkedIn.
Yeah, what's interesting here is I think there's less ones here. There's probably 3 or 4 ones, so it looks like more of you have actually got some profile created, be that at a sort of 5 level, or there's 5 or 6 that are at a 10 level in terms of utilizing LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. So look, once again, I think probably LinkedIn is probably something that is now more used, which is great. But I would say, once again, your CV is your information. You'll probably have a little bit more information that you have on LinkedIn. It's your baseline that you have that you can then change and adapt depending on the role that you're in. I'll also talk to you later on around, there are a lot of organizations now who don't even want to ever see your CV, and that's okay. But certainly there'll be experiences in there where they'll want to know, even as part of an application form, that you can then use your CV to go, oh yeah, they're asking me a question about that. I can take that example of that experience on my CV, not quite copy and paste it into that, but that provides you with the information, say, with a little bit of tweaks here and there, I can answer that question because I've already got an example that normally sits in my CV. Okay, thank you guys very much. So we're going to move on now. And Scott, I'm handing over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just a bit of an introduction to myself. I'll give away my age. I'm quite happy to give away my age today. I'm 49. I've worked for Anglo for about 3 years, coming up to 3 years. And I've been in recruitment in some way, shape or form for my entire career. So for over 20 years. I dread to think how many CVs I've actually looked at, and like Salima, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm an expert. CV and CV writing is quite subjective, but certainly I've seen a lot in terms of that's very kind of you. I'll take 34, Amy. That's awesome. But yes, I'm 49. Yeah, give it a couple of weeks and I'm going to be saying I'm going to be 50 this year. So yeah, there we go. And also I don't know how old everyone is, but I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old, and we're having conversations around sort of their futures and their careers. So I've got some personal experiences of people that will be entering the workforce over the next few years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of a good CV, and as the guys were saying, there's a common sense element to this, but I think there's some good information and guidance. And as a reminder, 15 seconds. Sometimes it might be less. You know, I have to say, you get a really tired recruiter who's had a big night the night before. You might be getting someone that's hungover, and he might give you 3 seconds. Or she might give you 3 seconds. So it's things to bear in mind. That's the reality of it. But as Salima was saying, there's also a lot more AI that's actually trying to determine and judge how to proceed with your CV. So there's some clear things here. Make it easy to read. Visually, it's powerful. And by these things, what we mean is not necessarily making it flamboyant and very colorful, but just ensuring that the sentence structure is clear, is concise. Often bullet points can be quite effective, but short sentences, and it's easily digestible so that someone having a look at it can actually take in what you're saying quite quickly and quite easily. It focuses on your skills and your capabilities, and it's a really critical point that I think gives the people that do it a distinct advantage around ensuring that those skills and capabilities are aligned to that job description. It is a pain, let me be honest. Going through the job description and going through your CV and trying to work out and update it, it's annoying, it's a pain, but it will give you an advantage because there'll be plenty of people out there that won't do that. And if you are doing it, then you're going to be in a better place, certainly straight away. 2 to 4 pages, I have to say, I'm a big fan of shorter is better. You know, I've got 25 years work experience. My CV is still only 2 pages long. You know, and what I've done is I've just dropped off experience from 15, 20 years ago, and if some of it's relevant, I'll find a way to feed it into some element of my professional profile or or some component of my personal statement. So you know, there's ways to keep it so it is quite short. So I think those are some of the things that I'd focus on in terms of the characteristics of a good CV. So preparing to write the CV and putting yourself in the shoes to some extent of the people that would actually be reading it. It's that opportunity to really promote yourself and highlight what they need to see. And this is where that focus on really looking at the job description and understanding what their requirements are. So those relevant skills, the experience that you've got, the capabilities, and understanding those job requirements. We've talked already about the AI and how that could actually you know, do the job of the recruiters, whereby the AI would be looking at the job description and that document, looking at your CV as a document, and effectively matching the two. One other thing that I'm going to mention here is, as you're thinking about this and looking at the job descriptions, that is also worthwhile doing if you know who might be involved in some of the recruitment, and sometimes you won't. Looking at the hiring manager, and this information won't always be out there, but looking at the hiring manager and looking at their LinkedIn profile can give you a little bit more of an insight into expectations and background. And it's just a little tip that I thought I'd throw in here that can give you a little bit more of an advantage. You might not always be able to know who the line manager, who the hiring manager is, but it's worthwhile trying to do a little bit of an investigation and maybe a search on LinkedIn to see what information you could find out that again could help you in terms of the CV. Probably more something that you do at a later stage in terms of who you're meeting as an interview, but it can actually help with some of that alignment from a CV perspective, knowing that. And there was one other thing that I was going to say here. No, that was around the AI, which we covered already. So no, that's what I'd focus on in terms of preparing. What to include in your CV and what not to include. Now you could get some rules here. Do apply. There's guidance here, but there will be situations and scenarios whereby you may end up, for whatever reason, needing to include something. So this is useful as an overarching guidance. But there will be some scenarios. So your name, your contact details, these are the clear things. Your email address. Make sure your email address is also something appropriate. What you may have set up once upon a time may not be the best thing to put on the top of your CV. So name, surname, and maybe a number is probably the safest bet. The professional statement, and I know Salima will talk a little bit more about this later on, really powerful in terms of that professional statement, and we'll spend more time on that a little bit later. Your work experience, qualifications and education, technical skills, that's really what you want to include. There's still a little bit of a debate as to the order of some of these things. We can talk about that again a little bit later on. But I think one thing that I would say is really important is that professional statement at the top of your CV. Really, there's something that's succinct and that will give whoever's picking it up and reading it an immediate, quick view as to who you are and what's going on. I think that would typically be one of the first things that would appear on your CV after your name. We've got here, in terms of what else it could include, achievements that are relevant for the role, hobbies and interests. I'm quite a fan of hobbies and interests. Some people aren't. I like the opportunity that it gives to potentially connect in something that's more of a sort of a space that's not necessarily work related. It's an opportunity, perhaps, if there is a hobby and interest that is shared, it's something to talk about, and it can kick off a conversation, and is a nice way to do some introduction or whatever it might be. So I'm a fan, not everybody is, but that's my personal view. We've talked on LinkedIn. The stuff on the right in the main, you wouldn't include. Some of this is around just, it's not necessarily colors and fancy fonts and designs. I can honestly say, having looked at hundreds of CVs and lots of colleagues that do the same, it's just annoying. It doesn't work. It doesn't get anybody's attention. It doesn't stick out. I've seen people print them off on hard paper and all sorts of tricks. It's not worthwhile. And the things more on the right, certainly around marital status, religion, is more around the potential for any discrimination in terms of those sorts of components. So some of these are things that are not necessarily not required. Some of them are more a case of potential opportunity for discrimination in terms of the things that we would give guidance to not include on your CVs. Hopefully that's helpful. Like Salima said, plenty of opportunities to ask questions. Back over to you, Salima.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Scott. And I think what I wanted to do, the piece from Scott, was to just give you an overview of the different sections that there are. They can be called different things. They could be various different ordering to it, but those are normally the typical sections that do appear on a CV. And very happy to take questions about some of the items that we said, actually, you don't need to put X, Y, and Z on a particular CV. We're happy to take that in Q&As. So we're just going to now do a little bit of a deep dive onto each of the sections. And that's all they are. They're just a bit of a deep dive. So the first, one of the key sections, I think, is around work history. And you may be sitting there thinking, well, actually, I'm still relatively early in my career, or I'm still at university. What can I really add into this section? And I think this is, to me, around thinking broad. You may have work that may be a Saturday job, a holiday job. It may be volunteering that you're doing. These are all great work history experiences that you are absolutely accumulating in your place. I mentor a couple of very early career individuals, and yes, they're at university, and I just think it's absolutely, as an employer, being able to see that they're at a university, they're getting a degree or whatever they're studying, A-levels, etc., but also they are in their holidays, they're accumulating this experience. And once again, you might be thinking, well, some of the experience may not be relevant to the role you're applying for, especially when you're early in your career. Fair. But what you can then do is to focus upon your achievements, your responsibility, your skills and capabilities. We are now living in so much of a world where it's around your skills and your skills that sit parallel to a role, and being able to adapt your skills to the context that you are in. So don't worry if you don't have that much experience in this space, or you don't have many years. And like Scott, Elam, and I, we have, I struggle, Scott, to put my CV in 2 pages. That's just my inner demons. I'm reluctant to remove anything from my CV. I think when you're early in your career, if you really put your mind to it, there could be, babysitting work, library work that you're doing, volunteering work, as I said previously, helping others. There's so many things that you're absolutely doing. You're just not really thinking about it in that most broader sense. So think of it as paid, unpaid, voluntary, etc. It could be helping other members of your family in maybe any businesses that they run, or any kind of shops that they run. They could be a whole raft of things that you are just doing. You just don't realize it's a wonderful skill set that you're developing. So, where you put that in the job title that you did, where you worked, and for how long. I'm a big fan of using very powerful verbs, improved, negotiated, reduced. This shows your achievement. So I think CVs and your work history section has to be a combination of not just what you did, but the impact of what you did. And that, to me, talks about what were you accountable for and what were your responsibilities. So, if you are having a role and you can provide data or statistics where you may have increased productivity, increased sales, because you did something, it helped the business, or because you did this, you were able to do that. That's really helpful. And And I think that's where a lot of when you look at job adverts, most job adverts will talk about at some level, this is the responsibility of the role or the accountabilities. That's where you can slightly adapt your career history section to maybe use some of the wording or the terminology that they are using. So they may say in a role, for example, must be able to persuade senior people. On my CV, it may talk about influencing people. Hey, whether it's persuading or influencing, let's not get into the semantics of it, but allows you an insight into what you might need to dial up in relation to your CV. And remember, especially when you start progressing in your career, any gaps, just be mindful of any gaps that you might also have. And you maybe have gaps because you maybe took a time off. You might have taken a gap here. You should put that in there, because guess what people do? Once they've reviewed your CV and you maybe get into they may start looking into, do all the dates line up? And so, where there are gaps where you took some time out to volunteering, unpaid, wherever it may possibly be, that wasn't necessarily academically in way inclined, just put it in there, because guess what? It'll come up in a conversation. I've known far too many people sometimes admit it, and actually there was some really richness of an experience there that they didn't necessarily manage to share with others. So your work history is actually quite an important piece. I'll give you a tip that I do. Is I do go onto LinkedIn quite often. I sometimes look at what other people are saying about their career histories on LinkedIn as well. Not to copy their wording, because I think you can sometimes pick up some really good hints and tips about how are people describing the work that they've done. Once again, LinkedIn is not a replication of your CV, but guess what? When you're learning and trying to figure out how you phrase things, LinkedIn is a great resource available to be able to pick up that kind of hints. How are others describing their experiences? There's also always a section about education and training. And interestingly, having, as I mentioned earlier on, I'm supporting my daughter to write her CV. And one of the pieces that they've suggested for her up front, just underneath her personal statement, which I'll come to in a second, is about where she's studying and for how long and what she's doing. So I do think adding that up front. So if you're at school, you put your school down, where you were. If at university, where you are, what you're learning, etc. So it's well worth putting some of those items also in place. Also put your qualifications, your most recent to your oldest as well. So if you've got A-levels, BTECs, then your GCSEs, etc., etc. So you start off with that, and that's when you sort of you drill down, and you can sort of see there. If you are studying and you're due to be graduating, you can put when you're going to be graduating date also as well. And the final piece I'll say is, if you are applying for a role or a job and it talks about a certain course or skill would be helpful, and you've got that training, I don't know, it could be a first aider, for example, or some kind of safety certificate that you have, put that also down in your CV as well, because that will also help. And the final piece I'll put on this side is, make sure you back up. If you've got Mandarin on your GCSE, and make sure you do have it. If you put it on your CV, be prepared to somebody to ask that question, okay? There are way too many times, sometimes people can fabricate what they have. People who fabricate what's on their CV will eventually get found out. So please, if you've got qualifications, put them on there, be able to justify what they are. And a lot of times, either organizations do their own checks or will ask for relevant documentation later on in the recruitment process. So that's the piece around sort of education and training. So let's talk a little bit about professional statements as well. Once upon a time, I used to view professional statements as oh God, what is that about? It sounds a little bit bragging and not sure about it. Over the last couple of years, I've actually changed my perspective, and I probably am aligned with what Scott said earlier on. It gives you a flavor and a feel for what is important for you and the individual CV I'm reviewing. You start to get a flavor of the person coming out. And what I've shared with you today is something that I've seen a couple of years ago around, and I love the fact it talks about hardworking, motivated, somebody who's finished their GCSEs or A-levels, it could be a degree, excellent grades you mentioned up front, seeking an apprenticeship, for example, you're also getting a feel for what their eventual goals are going to be. There's no real rhyme or wrong way of writing a personal statement, but you will need time to think about it. And it needs to reflect how you genuinely, your starting point and where you want to get to. And the purpose is to quickly outline your interest in the role and why you would be a good fit. So I would suggest that personal statement, professional statement that you can see there is ideally for somebody who's going to apply for an apprenticeship. Fantastic. So if somebody has applied for an apprenticeship, I can see straight away in their CV, their A levels, great. They've got maths and, maths and science, great. That's one, it'll be further down in their CV anyway, but they're looking for apprenticeship, and also why. And I love the why, and in this one, it's about to build upon keen scientific interest and start a career as a maintenance engineer. Okay, you may not have any idea where you want to get to, but I like, it's not just the what, it's the why also coming into play. So personal statements, I'm a big fan of those. Once again, in LinkedIn, most people will actually have a personal statement. And if you guys are really bored and you find this conversation really boring, you can go onto LinkedIn and find mine as well. I spent many an hour trying to refine my LinkedIn profile and my personal and my professional statement. And every so often I will go in and I'll change it, and I'll adapt it as well. So once again, LinkedIn is a good way of saying, how are other people talking about their professional statements? So let me talk to you a little bit over about other items that you might see on your CV. The first one is around professional memberships. So these are memberships that you are associated with. So those of you who are maybe doing finance, there'll be the finance ones. Maybe those of you who are doing engineering, there'll be the IMechE or MEng, for example. I'm in HR, so I'm a member of the CIPD. So I put my CIPD ones. And it's really important that you do include those kind of professional memberships, even if you have an associate or graduate membership, because it talks about you building up your experiences to eventually get potentially the charter elements of it as well. So a couple of things to remember, for example, there's avoid unprofessional ones. So avoid maybe memberships that may be controversial, social groups with a bad image, political groups, unless you are really trying to get a job in politics, then that's a very, very different conversation, so to speak. So professional memberships shouldn't be underestimated. So in my CV, I do mention the fact I'm part of the CIPD, and I do see a lot of people early in their career do talk about they've got associate membership building up to their chartered status as well. So the affiliations are quite important, especially if you're applying for a role where they eventually do want you to maybe attain and get some of those items. So let's talk about hobbies and interest. I have a love-hate relationship with hobbies and interest. There are some people out there who've got the most wonderful hobbies, and I sit there going, oh, that's really quite interesting. And it does become a talking point. But my view is it's something that you can include, but it's not necessary. If you have space in your CV at the bottom to talk about appropriate and relevant hobbies, please knock yourself out and add them in there. But remember, it doesn't really show you the suitability of the role. It won't be that thing potentially that shortlists you. It's a real interest point. For goodness sake, if you are applying for a role and I don't know, you're in science and your particular hobby is, I don't know, making cars or astronomy or something that is relevant, then absolutely include that in. So I'm not saying don't include it. I'm just thinking about if you've got the space, include it if it's relevant. But I also do think, and I'm going to now say something that's a little bit contradictory. When you are early in your career, a lot of early career roles do talk about the ability to work as a team and collaborate with others, etc. So if you are a member of a football team, a netball team, a lacrosse team, whichever team it is useful sometimes to put those in there, because by association of the fact you are a member of a team, which means you must actually have some skills, which means you're quite good at working with others as well. So do think about that. The second point on this one I want to talk about is references. So my daughter was advised to put down her references at the bottom of her CV. And I think when you're early in your career and you may not have those plethora of information that you put on your CV, you probably will have gaps at the bottom about references. But if you are running out of space, I wouldn't. And the reason for that is a lot of organizations will actually check with you to say, hey, we would like to progress you and we would like to get some references from you. Is it okay that we approach your references? And if they're not on your CV, they'll come to you anyway, say, can you please give us the names of your referees, etc. So it's not necessary that you include it. So I'm slightly contradicting what I'm saying on here based upon the advice my daughter recently got. She's going to include her director of studies, and I'm sure those of you at university would include that. And those of you at school, you may want to put your head of year or your head of department. And as a courtesy, if you are including people to be referees on your CV, please make sure you've spoken to them and they know about it, because remember, you will be putting their name, their email address, and maybe a contact detail as well. And they've got to be comfortable that they feel equipped. One is, you're sharing their information with others, and they are equipped to give a proper reference on you as well. The other piece about references, I've never seen anybody give somebody who isn't going to give them a good reference. So I'm not even going to debate to you about the purpose of whether it's even worth organizations taking in a reference or not. But if you're going to add it, check with the people beforehand, okay? And as Scott said earlier on, it may sound really simple. You may be saying, why are you reinforcing this? I think at the bottom of every page of your CV, you should be putting down your name and your contact information. What you may not be aware of, organizations use your data in many, many, many different ways. I've also seen situations where somehow the CV has not actually properly saved against somebody's application and the CV is loitering out there. So who is this Salima Shariff? And if my CV doesn't have my name and my email address and my contact information, it can potentially get disconnected from my application. But also it becomes more important where you do have many people in an organization where they may print out off your CV. And if you're printing your CV and they're printing a whole stack of CV and they drop the CV pile on the floor, which has happened to me several times in the past, if the CVs are not stacked together appropriately, your CV can get lost. So I always put down at the bottom my email address, my name, and I put down, if it's a CV that's 4 pages long, at the bottom I'll just put page 1 of 4. So if it does get disconnected and lost, they can see, oh God, Salima's CV was 4. Let me find the other one. It just helps them pull it all together. So I'm a great fan of using footnotes in a Word document. And the second bullet point on there, I have seen many a funny email address, which I'm sure made a lot of fun and was funny at a moment in time. But when it comes to an employer and you've got a very risque, inappropriate, funny email address, whilst it may bring a smile to my face for a moment, I do sit there going, why can't you just be salima.sharif@gmail.com? So there's a time and place when you use your funny emails, and there's a time and place when you use your professional one. What we need very much here is very much your professional, your professional email address. A couple of things to think about in terms of format and style. So beware of your style and your formatting that you're doing. Be professional and to the point. As Scott said, use bullet points. The power of bullet points is fantastic. It's much easier to read. And I think CVs need to be a combination of words with the right font size and spaced out, so it's easy for the eye to read and for the human being and also AI to properly also be reading it as well. Avoid acronyms and abbreviations and any internal terminology that might be used in a university. So if I said to you guys, include your DOS as your referee, I now know DOS means Director of Studies. 6 months ago, I didn't know what a DOS was. I would have thought it was a programming language. So be careful around using that kind of terminology. The penultimate piece I will tell you is proofread your CVs again and again and again. You should read it. A trusted friend could read it. Anybody else can read it, just to proofread, say, are there any mistakes there? And trust me, as I've been going through this presentation, I'm going, oh, there's a typo there, there's a spelling there. Sometimes when we're doing it ourselves, we sometimes don't see the mistakes. And sometimes you need a fresh pair of eyes to look at your CV and go, that looks bunched up, that doesn't quite make sense. You're talking past tense, then you're talking present tense. So it's well worth looking at some of those items coming into play. I'll talk a little bit here. I've already talked about actually here. Please don't make your CV font size any less than 10. Those of us who are barely 28 can barely cope with looking at the screen at a font size of 10. 12 is good. So between 10 and 12 is good. Stick to professional fonts like Arial, Cabral, Times New Roman, etc. You don't need to have nice script. Keep it nice and clean. Please do use font, bold and underline. It just helps that kind of layering and that formatting that you see here. The other piece I will say is, and this comes very important when you're uploading your CV, make sure your CV, normally you have a Word document. Normally when you're uploading it, turn it into a PDF. It's easier to pass through. It also means the formatting is preserved. And what you also may find, but organizations are getting better at this, is sometimes there is a size limit on what you can upload. So this is where we say fancy photos, graphics are all a waste of time, quite frankly, because if you can't upload the document, you're going to have to remove it anyway. And as I said before, also save the document as a professional name. And normally my suggestion is first name _ last name, and save it as that. It might be Salima _Shariff, but version 2023, etc. But also save it with a professional name. I could tell you horror stories of it's been fine, but I can see the file name that's been given. And I love it when the file name given is the file name associated with a competitor of ours. And that's when I'll sit there going, oh, you sent this CV also to our competitors. Great. You don't need to have those kind of own goals in life. Okay. So help yourself. And the final tips I'm going to help with you today is to keep it simple. Remember, you are competing with many, many, many candidates out there. You are going to have to spend time on your CV. I've said already several times today, you're going to have your baseline CV. That's your baseline. You are going to have to adapt it. 20 minutes adapting now may be the clincher that gets you into the next stage of the recruitment process. So it's well worth doing that investment. And I know it's a schlep, and I know you guys are really busy, but it's well worth doing that up front. My third point is update your CV. So, those of you at university, you should be actually reviewing it even now. Which modules have you now done? Which modules are you planning to do? What modules did you do in your first year, in your second year? It's always worth just keeping it fresh from that perspective, as well as thinking about what work history do I need to include, etc. And also, as I said before, keep your contact details up to date as well. So with that, I've rattled through quite a lot, and I think it's now time for us to maybe answer some of the questions that you have for Scott and I.
Thank you so much, Salima. Thank you, Scott. And also thank you, Diego Henriques, who I notice has also joined us and is a fantastic leader at Anglo American and supportive of migrant leaders. That was fantastic, Salima. Thank you so much, and Scott. In terms of questions, I would encourage our migrant leaders mentees on this webinar to think about questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, or if you feel brave enough, put your hand up and I will let you speak so that you can ask your questions in person. The first question is from Hevia, and she's asking, where can we rewatch the recording of this meeting? Yes, you can. That's probably a question for me. We will be formatting this video, and we will be sharing it through our migrant leaders social media channels such as LinkedIn and our YouTube. So you will hear from me when the video is available to rewatch.
Great. Elam, I can see a great question from Timothy around the wonderful question whether you include hobbies or interests. And Timothy, I think it's not going to answer your question. It depends. It's going to be the question. Is going to be the answer. If you've got the space and it is relevant, add it in. If you don't have the space or it's not necessarily entirely relevant, then don't sweat about it. Don't include it. Scott would love it. I'll probably go, oh, that's fantastic. He does beach ball, beach volleyball. Wonderful. So there's no rhyme nor reason to say yes or no. I hate to say it depends.
Personally, Salima, I think I agree with everything you and Scott said, actually. And I would say, depending on the job, some hobbies and interests are very relevant, but also it's a nice way of picking 2 or 3 relevant hobbies and interests, including your CV that you've customized for that role. And it's a good way of the employer getting to know you a little bit so that they think of you as a person and not just a CV. It's much harder to reject a CV if they can see a person behind it. Obviously, only relevant information and not going overboard.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe choose what you do on a Friday night, not on the CV, but maybe what you do with your charity work or work around local communities, work around maybe anything to do with if you're doing an engineering degree, a science degree, or finance degree. Absolutely, we're relevant and will add to the color of your CV. Absolutely include those.
Wonderful. So we are watching out for any more questions. One of the things while the mentees are thinking about questions, one of the challenges that young people have and always have had is lack of experience. And I think it goes back to what you and Scott said earlier. You don't necessarily need to be in a paid job and have paid work experience for the skills and achievements to be relevant. So we would really, really encourage you guys to think about school projects, school roles that you might have, whether you were a prefect or a subject ambassador or did a team project. All of those things give you the skills and experiences to demonstrate for a future job that you're applying to. So keep thinking, so what? Is this relevant to the job and organization I'm applying to? And do include those as skills, because there are still experiences, whether you got paid for them or not, whether they are in your school, university, or elsewhere, they're all relevant achievements and experiences.
And Eleanor, I would also add. Go on, Scott. Go on. Go on.
Sorry, Salima. What I would say is don't dismiss things that are just very normal in your life. So if you're volunteering or you're caring for somebody, don't necessarily think that that's normal and dismiss it as something that wouldn't be interesting on your CV. Babysitting, maybe less so. But if you're caring for somebody, or like I say, if you're volunteering, it sometimes is easy. I had this conversation with my daughter literally over the last few months, and she asked, "Well, why would I include that?" You know, because her friends also do it, so she just thinks it's normal and not distinguishable. But it is, and you're not necessarily competing just with your friends. So do think twice about some of those things that you might feel are just normal and day to day that on a CV will actually help distinguish you between another applicant.
I think that's a really good point, Scott, because, you know, one of the things when I speak to, you know, young leaders comes up is around helping others. So all of you guys will be really, really clever. I know you are. I'm sure people will reach out to you. You know, maybe it's your siblings, it's your cousins, it's the people you live with may come to you and say, "Hey, I'm stuck on this subject." You know, you mustn't underestimate that kind of informal tutoring and mentoring you guys will also be doing as well. And you'll probably sit there modestly thinking, well, well, we all do it. And, my friends go to me, they go to others, etc. as well. But I think there is something around giving back to others, and the fact that people source you guys out, want you to explain something that they're finding difficult, that is a skill in itself. And that shouldn't be underestimated. Yes, you'd have to think about a nice fancy way in which you describe that support that you give, but it is still good experience. It's a great skill that you have, and something that you are then using to communicate to others and explain to others. It's a great example of actually influencing and supporting other individuals. So once again, I think Scott's a really valid one. Just because it may be easy or normal or simple to you doesn't mean other people will view it. Put together, it builds a wonderful kaleidoscope of skills and experiences that you bring to your CV and then eventually future employers.
You know, Salima, Scott, I always talk to migrant leaders mentees about their career choices. And I always say it's almost like 3 circles, and you look for the common area between the 3 circles. Think about an industry and career where you are really, you have the technical skills, you have the academic acumen, you're really good at that career, whether it is finance or engineering or creative industries, where you have technical skills and you are academically strong in those subjects. The second thing is for it to be a job and industry that you're passionate about. And there's the third element that people usually forget. It is an industry and job that suits your character. Certain industries, for example, really rely on their professionals being willing to coach, mentor, and transfer knowledge to their colleagues. For example, management consulting, investment banking, and others. They are knowledge-driven industries, and engineering as well, of course. And therefore, if as a young person at a school and in your arena, you showed the character to want to teach others, mentor others, help others succeed by mentoring them and tutoring them, that characteristic stays with you as a young professional, and employers love hiring you in those industries. So to Scott's point, it's really quite relevant and good to showcase that in your CV and talk about that in your interviews when requested.
Brilliant.
We have one other question that has come up, guys. Mohammed has asked, if you have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and have already outlined the modules for your bachelor's degree, which has taken up a significant amount of space, you've got little space left to outline the modules of your master's degree. So it's a space problem on your CV. How would you recommend fitting in both degrees and appropriately outlining the modules from both degrees?
I would always suggest the most recent and the most senior degree comes first. So Mohammed, you might want to actually put more emphasis on your master's than necessarily the bachelor's. The other piece I would say is it comes down to the adaptability of your CV to the role. It doesn't have to be every module you've ever possibly done. So you might need to refine and prioritize those modules that are much more pertinent to the role that you're applying for. So I'll share with you, my daughter's applying for a lot of engineering internships at the moment, and a number of the internships talk about specific modules that they want. So in her CV, we're going to be focusing on those specific modules. It doesn't have to be the whole raft. So Mohammed, I would suggest that you do, the master's is your most, if you want a more senior degree, it's maybe focusing on those. Then it goes into the bachelor's, and then really being critical around which of those modules are really going to be the ones you need to make sure any future employers know about it. For a number of employers, and depending on the role that you're going for, they won't sometimes even care about your modules. They'll just say, have you got a degree in X? So I think once again, it comes back to the role that you're looking for and what they're asking for. As I said before, a lot of it might just be, yeah, do you have an engineering degree? Do you have a master's, etc.? They don't necessarily need to see the modules. Hope that helps in some ways to really prioritize it down.
Thank you, Salima. We've got another space-related question. Hevia is asking, should your CV always be one page or could it be more? Obviously, I think we said that standard CVs can be 2 pages, even those of us with 25 years experience like Salima, Scott and I, our CVs are still typically 2 pages and only the relevant information. I personally wouldn't recommend any more than 2 pages. What are your thoughts, Scott and Salima?
It is 2 pages. Trust me, I feel the angst when my CV goes over to page 3 and page 4. And I just have to remind myself, whilst I think it's wonderful, other people will find it boring. So we are living much more in a world that it is 2 pages. In the guidelines, you'll get, I've said 2 to 4, because sometimes it depends on if you're got into more of an engineering type where they do want to find out a little bit more about your technical aspect. That's where page 3 and page 4 very much come into play. I do think it is much more, on average, it is 2 pages. And remember, 2 pages are 2 sides of one A4 piece of paper. So you can, metaphorically, in the good old days, turn it over 1 and 2.
That's great. Thank you. Right, everyone, we are just after 6 o'clock. So we probably have 1 minute for any final questions, if anyone really is keen to ask one final question. Otherwise, we can thank Diego, Salima, and Scott for their time and expertise, and we can end it there.
Elam, I'll just offer to everybody on the call today, on a serious note, please do, sounds going to sound a bit weird. Check me out on LinkedIn. I'm not saying my CV or my LinkedIn is perfect. Scott, I hope to God your LinkedIn is up to date, because I'm about to say,
it is up to date. Well. I will have another look at it before the end of the year. I like that tip, Salima, but I have updated it in the last few months. So yes, please feel free to check me out. Yeah, that's no problem. And getting ideas from those, and getting ideas from LinkedIn, you've got millions of profiles up there. It can be really, really helpful to maybe find a bit of additional inspiration.
And I would like to add as well, on the subject of millions of profiles out there, compared to when we were growing up, Scott, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, there's a lot of information about careers and other things we want to find out about. But please, migrant leaders, mentees, learn from an early age to know what good looks like, and really only pick up the tips from LinkedIn profiles and from other professionals where they've done something particularly well. And always remember, no one person does everything brilliantly. So pick up who does what really well and pick up the best tips from different people. But don't pick up things that are not good examples of how to do things, because there's a lot of bad profiles on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely. That's why I'm only suggesting us three as a starting point, okay? And then maybe look at profiles of people we're connected with as well. And then that's how you grow. Because you're right, there's really great stuff, and there's a lot of rubbish also out there.
Yeah. But sometimes looking at what bad looks like is also useful to know what not to do.
Yeah, very much so.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Diego, Salima, Scott, that was fantastic as ever. Thank you for your tips on CV writing, and thank you for your support. I shall leave it there, and thank you, Migrant Leaders Mentees, for attending and being so engaging. We'll see you next time.